Hi, welcome to a eighth edition of the lockdown discussions. I'm raising my voice like a question, asking Gary if it's eight, but I think it is eight. 7 with prizes, and now 8 is, well, yeah, we decided book covers, book design, book jackets, whatever you want to call it. Gary and I are going to take it on, and we're going to talk about it as we have done the last 7 weeks, hopefully diplomatically tearing apart the industry. But anyway.
So I like to think this one's probably a little bit more fun, slightly less heavy duty than some of the previous episodes.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, do you know, I think it can be quite contentious, actually.
Yeah? Well, we'll get into that, won't we?
We will. So that's what we're doing today. But we're going to do what we did last week, which I think I'm going to stop looking at the camera as well. I'm going to start looking at you, Gary.
I'll look at you.
Yeah, nice. Anybody who's listening to this on audio, we're just looking at each other. What have you been reading this week, Gary?
That's a good question. Yeah. I've been reading, so I'm going to hold a book up to camera, as we're going to do that a lot in this episode. So anyone listening on the podcast, I'll do my sort of best to explain the covers, but yes. Not for this one. I was recommended this book by my good friend Nathan from Dead Ink. He thought I would enjoy it. He was right. The book is Naples 44, an intelligence officer in the Italian labyrinth by Norman Lewis, republished by Eland, who do those lovely looking kind of classic travel writing books. But this is the account of a British intelligence officer who's dropped into Italy during the invasion in 1943, during World War II, stationed with gathering intelligence in Naples and the surrounding area. And it's just kind of his accounts of that year spent in this city that's been absolutely kind of decimated by the war.
Yeah. Naples was properly screwed, wasn't it?
Yeah, but he's operating in the towns around Naples, which are all still controlled by the mafia, including the American mafia. And it's got this very kind of good deadpan, I suppose, very English sort of eye on these completely mad, sometimes funny, sometimes completely absurd, sometimes really quite tragic things happening all around him. And yeah, it's amazing. Okay. Highly recommended. So I've already gone out and bought other books by Norman.
Are they all in Italy, or is this the only one?
Well, I was looking into his background. He was from Enfield originally, apparently.
Oh,
good lad.
North Londoner.
I think his parents were the kind of wacky Welsh spiritualists, so he married a Sicilian woman. So he wrote a few other books about Sicily, but he's written all kinds of travel books.
Okay.
He wrote in his life about his travels around the world. But I'd never encountered his work before, and it was fantastic, really fantastic read for anyone.
Sorry, so it's travel but history at the same time somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I think travel in the very loose sense of the word. It's This is non-fiction, but it's his very kind of poetic diary accounts of just the world when the rules have all stopped. I'm very interested in that and the kind of absurdity of war. There's no heroics in this book.
When the rules have all stopped, I mean that sounds very contemporary.
Yeah.
Right now, doesn't it? If you think about it. Although there's some rules, but we're not really sure what the rules are, etc.
They're interesting periods in history. They can be very difficult for people, but there's certain things that he's recounting that I don't think I would believe if they were in a novel. That's the strange thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what they said. That old Chinese curse, isn't it? May you live through interesting times.
Indeed, yeah.
Good for writing material. Less good for the mental health, probably. But,
what about yourself? What have you been reading?
I've been reading rereading, actually, rather than reading for the first time. This is Some by David Eagleman. A beautiful little. I'm not sure what size this is. It's like smaller than the normal novel format. Would you call that a pocket book size?
Yeah, maybe.
Possibly. I mean, if I compare it to one of our books, our normal B format books, it's a little bit smaller.
I think that's an A format, I think.
A format. There you go. For the book nerds, A format. So David Eagleman is a neuroscientist, neurologist, and also happens to be an incredible prose writer. And it's just vignettes, no longer than 2 or 3 pages, on what might be in the afterlife if there is an afterlife, and it's just beautiful. I read a lot about death anyway. I don't know why. I have this thing with death. Have done ever since I was a kid. So I really enjoy books about death and about dying. And I say enjoy. I mean, that sounds a bit perverse. What I mean is I take philosophical pleasures in such material. And this is, each little vignette's totally different and it's really beautifully written. There's a really nice one early on, which he describes 3 stages of death. First is when your body literally, you die. Second is your funeral. And then the third death is when the last person on earth remembers you at the last point. So
I think about that a lot, actually. When the last person who remembers you dies, that's when you
that's
really
your
die,
last
right?
that's your last death. That's when you really die. Yeah. And so he has this story where there's this waiting room for you, kind of limbo, I guess, to get before you go up to heaven or wherever it is. And you're waiting for the last person to remember you. And then as soon as they die, you kind of leave the waiting room, but they come in the waiting room because like and you normally know them, so you're the last person to have known them. Then whatever. Anyway, but there's still all these famous people from history like Shakespeare who are still in that waiting room because everyone's always thinking about them and always remembering them. So they're stuck in this kind of endless loop. It's beautiful. Anyway, so good for this sort of period as well. I've known a couple of people who have directly and also people's parents who have died of coronavirus recently. So it's just one of those books I sometimes return to when I think about that sort of stuff. But yeah, beautiful book, published by Canongate, I think. Yeah,
lovely. Sounds really good.
And an okay cover. If you, it sounds a little door that's opened on a black.
I like that cover. Yeah, it's quite simple and effective, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I suppose that leads us on to what we're the main point of the chat today. So someone suggested on Twitter that we speak about cover design. That's the kind of broad topic today. So I wanted us to talk a bit about kind of how we as Influx Press go about getting our covers designed. I was going to talk a bit about some experiences I've had of kind of cover design meetings at bigger publishing companies, and then we were going to talk about what we think is good, what isn't good. I mean, we're not designers, so I always wonder how important our opinion is, but I don't know. And and then we're going to talk about the topic that comes up a lot, I find, and when people question why one book's cover looks very similar to a previous book with that cover. Now, we have addressed this in previous episodes, but I think it'd be quite good to
I think so.
dig down into that a little bit more. So I think let's start with how we go about designing covers.
Yeah, I think we generally have a process, don't we? I think you and I probably possibly differ slightly in our briefings of the designers. So generally, Influx, whoever's commissioned the book kind of sees that book through editorial and then through the design process. So we're kind of in charge of the books that we commission. If
we essentially act as kind of project managers, don't we, on the book?
Oh, I like that. I might put that on my CV. So generally what I do, which is, it's slightly different to you, we send the manuscript to a cover designer. We have maybe a pool of 4, I think it's probably about what we've got.
At the moment, all freelancers. I mean, I find it funny when, funny in a nice way, I find it funny when we get emails from prospective artist designers and they'd ask to speak to the art director of Influx Press.
Well, I mean, that's always funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
And one of my favourite things is when people who are like running prizes or whatever, and you get shortlisted or longlisted, and they email you and they say, "Can you put us in touch with a publicity person?" And like before Jordan came on board, it was like, "Yeah, that's also me." They're like, "Oh,
I'm a man with many faces."
Yeah. Anyway, so I will send the book to the designer and then generally give a kind of maybe an essence of what I want. So if I'm thinking I want this mainly typographic, or I want this to have a feeling of like with real photography, like with Plastic Emotions, that has a picture of Minette de Silva, who's the subject of the book, which I think helps. And I kind of let the designer run away with it, really. And then they come back and they'll say, yeah, I like that one, don't like that one, let's work on this, this, and this. I think depending on the book itself, like sometimes the author wants a little bit more say, and I might be more concessional in that respect. That's something we can talk about later. But generally, I like to let the designer just come up with some shit. I don't know what's your.
So I've got a book that we recently published. So for people listening on the podcast, you can't see this. I'm holding up a copy of Jolts by Fernando Strigotti, which was published just end of last month. Kit was the editor on this. So what was the process for this?
Right.
It's quite an abstract image. I'll hold it up while you talk.
So this is designed by Austin Burke, who's based in Dublin. We spoke about Fernando being an Argentine writer, a Latin American writer, but he's writing in English. So what we wanted was a nod to Latin American covers, but it not to look like it was Latin American, but to have a kind of reference, I guess, to that style of 60s, 70s Latin American book covers. And I think he's done a really nice job. It's more about that box, the way he's got the box of the illustration and then the text at the top. That's kind of very classic, but it's the way he's done the text is to have like the big J and then a small O and a big LTS, which makes it look more contemporary. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's correct. So, essentially, what you do, you come up with a kind of rough brief for the designer, don't you? And you give a kind of getting across the kind of vibe you want. So when I work with a designer, we often work with the same designers, but for different books, don't we? I would write a cover brief. So I would do largely what you said. I'd say, right, this is the book. Here's the manuscript. I'd also give them some extracts, maybe for like key sections if they don't want to have to read the whole book, or they might not have time to read the whole book. I would probably, in this cover brief, I don't know, do some keywords for the kind of like the mood. So if it's well, I've got an example. So I've got a review copy here of an upcoming book of ours, Boy Parts, by Eliza Clark. The cover of this is designed by Luke Bird.
Double it up.
Double it up, yeah. Which I think he's done an amazing job with this cover. So
when I describe it quickly for the audio.
Yeah, it's difficult describing visual. What's the cover? It's a sort of black and white color scheme with a black and white photo of a kind of young man whose head is presumably shaking from side to side but blurry, and then the title and the author's name are both kind of almost in a bright salmon pink, very bold, standing out on there. So quite a stark image with sort of bold colours on there.
You know, the blurring of his face. It reminds me of that scene in Four Lions when the guy says that they didn't want to be captured on CCTV, so they just shake their head so much so that on CCTV it'll be blurred. But anyway, yes, carry on.
So yeah, in that brief, I would have said, what's the vibe for this book? It's quite dark, transgressive, all those kind of keywords. I'd say, like, here's some key scenes. Here's the manuscript. I would also send over like what I call cover comps, as in comparisons.
Yeah.
So saying, right, I'm not saying that we want to rip off one of these covers, but here are other books that are similar to this book that we like the cover for, just for some.
It's like getting a mood, isn't it? It's getting an atmosphere off other things, because it's a guide for the designer, isn't it? It's not saying please replicate this.
No.
But it's saying like, this is the vibe, and that's what with Jolts, give a couple of these Latin American covers and say that's the vibe. We don't want that, but we want some sort of this is the direction we're going.
Yeah, and for this cover specifically, Boy Parts, I also reference some kind of film covers. because there's a kind of extreme cinema element, and there were certain kind of film posters that seem relevant to kind of get the mood across. It doesn't have to be, like I said, a reproduction of the actual style, but just so the designer knows what we're trying to get across to the author, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because what's the cover's purpose? What would you say? What is a cover's purpose, at least for Influx Press? What's the purpose of our covers?
Well, the commercial purpose for it is to make you pick the book up out of a table or out of a shelf in a bookshop, but it also has to operate as a recognizable thumbnail on Amazon or whatever online retail space you've got, right? So it has to be recognizable. It also has to be intriguing, and it has to invoke a sense of like, oh, what's this? And I think our covers do that. I think our designers are brilliant in that respect. I was thinking about this as well, like when you're talking about giving guidance and stuff. I've never actually had the conversation with any of our designers as to whether they want guidance or not. Like sometimes, so Jamie Keenan, who's one of our designers, he did Bindle Stiff and I'm Not Sidney Poitier, which I can just hold up here. That's I'm Not Sidney Poitier.
Remember to describe it for the.
So yeah, this is essentially a man in a suit with a red background, but he's cut off the top of his head and the bottom of his feet, and then drawn the head on and drawn the feet on with a sort of ink hand, sort of scribbly ink, and then he's written, "I'm not Sidney Poitier," but anything outside of the red box where the text lies is also handwritten. So it's kind of an idea of like playing around with like who is and who isn't and whatever. But a very striking cover. I think I'd pick that up. But I didn't give Jamie a brief. I just said, "Here's the book. Just do whatever you want," because I didn't really know what I wanted.
Yeah, you didn't want to prescribe it to him. So, and because you've got a kind of good relationship with that designer, I think that helps at the level we work. That we work fairly closely with the designers, and we've got quite good personal relationships with them. And when we work with people a few times, I think they become. I don't want to speak for them. I hope it's easier for them to have a rough idea, roughly, of what we like and what the tone is. I've got another good example here. Is second novel we published by Adam Scoville, How Pale the Winter Has Made Us. This was actually easier because this cover is very much in the style of the first novel we published, which is called Mothlight, which came out last year. So this kind of follows on, not a series, but we wanted the second novel to kind of match the look of the first novel. But this is kind of this was designed by Vince Haig, who does a number of our covers, does some brilliant work. This is supposed to be one of the stained glass windows at Strasbourg Cathedral, and then in like each little bit, it's sort of photos that will feature in the book of kind of prominent architecture and people from Strasbourg. So it kind of looks kind of abstract, but actually has quite a strong thematic link to what the book is about. And
this is also really a good example for possibly for people who don't know is how you can vary things on the cover. So this has something called Spot UV.
It does. Can anyone see the shininess?
Yeah, there's a reflectiveness on the illustration,
and it has the degenerate sounding French flaps.
Oh, everyone has a French flap.
French flaps.
Puts a lot of cost on the production, though.
It does, doesn't it? So I mean, that's less about how it looks, and that's about the sort of feel and texture of it, isn't it? Do we want to add things like Spot UV? Do we want to add French flaps?
Debossing,
emboss, deboss. Lots and lots of fun you can have with all of these.
I think with those ones, particularly with embossing or debossing, if it's like uncoated cover, when
like
you pick it up,
which is uncoated. It's got that
when you pick it up, actually you get a nice feel for it. So there's an extra element of, oh, I like the look of this, and then you pick it up and you're like, oh, I like the feel of it as well. It brings. Maybe this can lead on to our next bit of discussion. Actually, it produces an object. And that exists outside of the words, right? So you start feeling the book, and then there's something tangible or material about the book that goes beyond what's inside the pages, and that's something that designers, publishers, they all think about.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, especially for independent small presses like ourselves, where I think the book is the object. is slightly more important than to more commercial fiction. I know I'm a bit of a bibliophile. I get told off for buying too many books on a weekly basis. I can't stop it, really. The tactility, is that the word, of a book?
Tactility will do, yeah. I like that, yeah.
I think it's really important. And if it's, for me, if it's a really great book and it's a lovely edition with a great cover, what a perfect combo.
Do you ever buy those folio editions?
I've got one or two. I think I only bought it second hand, though.
Okay.
I've got one of M.R. James's stories, assembled by Nigel Neal, which I bought in Aldborough, weirdly, which is where one of M.R. James's stories is set. So that was a bit spooky. Okay. But yeah, the folio editions are very lovely. I think I only own one, but maybe as I get older and hopefully wealthier, maybe I might buy some more.
Well, we'll wait to see what happens with Influx before we can start doing that. Okay, so I guess also another question would be, we rarely do hardbacks, right? We do paperbacks in general. Do you want to talk through why that is?
Yeah, that's a good question, which I suppose is the obvious one is just cost. And it's still, for reasons I don't really understand anymore. I know it's still standard in kind of mainstream literary publishing to do the hardback first, and then you do your paperback edition a year later. But of course, many readers actually complain that no one can carry around a hardback or anything like that. So I think, but the reason we do it is, I think, simply the cost. It's just more expensive to produce a nice looking hardback. We've experimented a few times with it. We did a nice limited hardback edition of Gareth Rees's The Stone Tide, which looks great, but we haven't really done hardback since then, because in the end we kind of weighed up the options and thought probably wasn't worth it economically.
No, and also, I mean, on top of that, I think there's, from my perspective as well, books shouldn't cost more than a tenner for people. If you want to read the book by any of our authors, I don't want you paying $16.99, $17.99 for it when you don't have to. It should. I know, like $9.99 is still, this is our general price. It's probably higher than your $7.99 Penguin, but it's still affordable for a lot of people. And I think just buying a $16.99, $17.99 hardback, that's only going to go to a certain strata of reader.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think to move this conversation on slightly, one thing we haven't covered is, so you've sent your brief to the designer.
Yes.
Then what? Presumably they don't send back the finished cover, do they?
No. Well, I mean, that's never happened. They'll send back a few options of what they've been thinking about, maybe some rough designs. So, for example, with Jamie, that I referenced earlier, who did the Percival Everett covers, because I said just do whatever you want, he only sent back one version, and that was fine, because I was like, yeah, this is sick, I love it. But if I'm saying I want it a little bit like this, with a bit of this, bit of this, bit of this, that's almost dictates I need a few options to look at. And then it might be a question of saying, I like this element from that and that element from this. Can we put them together? Can we change the color? Can we change the photograph on the front? That sort of stuff. So there's a back and forth a little bit. And then I'll send it to you and we'll have a discussion. And then after that, we tend to run it by the author. And if they like it, then we kind of press go. If they absolutely hate it, we have to have another conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting, that one, isn't it? So I would agree. I usually ask for various options, and then it might go through a few rounds. So then we narrow down those options and say, right, we like these bits, but can we see a few more? Then we'd probably decide on one or maybe two. So the question of like author input's really, I think, really interesting, because, and I say this as an author, the question is, obviously the novel, the collection, whatever, it's the author's baby. They want it to look a certain way. But authors are not necessarily designers, are they? And they say, well, I'm not, which is why I don't design books, because I would come up with something that was crap, basically. So it's balancing It's trying to make everyone happy. Who do you want
Mm.
happy? Well, you want the publisher to be happy, but we have to make other people happy as well, don't we? We have to make the sales team at our distributor, because we have to present these covers to a sales team, and they'll go, well, actually, you'll have a better chance of selling the book if this, and this changes. See what I mean? But of course, the author might have an idea of how they want to see it. So actually, that can become quite a delicate balancing act. And I'm always aware of, I like to give the author's input, but I would never show the author all 12 options. And I wouldn't want to involve like you right at the beginning, because I think if you let too many people's voices coming in too early, you end up with a cover sort of designed by committee, which then no one's sort of happy with it. Do you see what I mean? Which is
Yeah, design by committee is the worst outcome of anything, I think. I agree. I mean, I think there's, if the author hates it, then you can't publish it with that cover, because
no, why would we want to do that?
Well, exactly. But there are many authors who are very upset with their covers, not our authors, but other authors. And I think if you're going to be reading it, the author is also one of the salespeople of the book. Mm-hmm. So if they love the cover, they're going to want to be like, "Hey, here's my book," reading from it at an event, being very happy with it. I think that's really important. But also, we have to take into account the salespeople, the people that make the money, who know how book sales work. You have to listen to them, because otherwise you might have a cover that just doesn't work, and it will just disappear, and the book could be a work of genius. But if the cover's not working, no one's going to read the book, so no one will know it's a work of genius. It's that balance of, like, we often go on about commodification against art. The book is a commodity. The writing might be the art. The book is the commodity. It's the vehicle for the art. The book itself is not the art. And up to a point, right? We're talking about folio editions and stuff like that. But like your general paperback, it might have a physical presence and it might be beautiful to look at and stuff. But without the words, it's not a book, is it? So, it doesn't really matter. So I guess I think we're both in between. We're like, if the author hates it, then we wouldn't do it. We'd go back and get some different options. But generally, having the author involved at the beginning stages is a nightmare, because it just
I wouldn't do that basically as a point. I don't do that.
No, and I think also that as an author, you're so close to the work that you can't see what might be a better way of selling it. But on the other hand, when you're an author and you get a terrible cover, I wonder what the publisher then plows on with. Like, I wonder how that feels. I don't know how that feels.
Well, so what's interesting about this is it would be very unusual, as far as I'm aware, for any kind of book contract to say that the author has any say over the cover. We do ours as a courtesy, but there's nowhere is it contracted that that the author would have say, for the reasons we've said. Now, at my old job where I worked at Titan, the authors didn't get any say. I think it was one person who had to book like approval on his books, and that was Michael Moorcock. Do you know what I mean? And so the way, there you go through cover meetings about certain titles, could go on for weeks, sometimes even months, hundreds of variations. Really great design team there, I think, but they were used to like churning out not 5 options, not 12 options. I saw a book go through, I think, 150 different variants before something was selected on. At that point, if you were the project editor on that, you would say to the author, "Here's your cover. I hope you like it," and that would be it. Now, unless someone was perceived to have a certain kind of stature,
like Moorcock,
or if they kicked up a real fuss, otherwise the author doesn't get a say in there. And to be honest, sometimes if you thought the cover was only okay, that must be hard for the author to deal with that. I've been lucky with the 2-3 books that I've had published that I've been happy with my covers. The new one coming with Dead Ink, I'm delighted with. So, but again, that's with the small press where there is a bit more of a kind of nice dialogue about it. So I think it must suck to have a cover you don't like for your own book.
I imagine it would suck a lot, and I think that's partly one of the benefits of being with a smaller press, other than great editorial control and a sort of cozy family atmosphere, is that you may not get you may not design a cover yourself, but there will be this courtesy element of saying like we're going to give you a veto if you absolutely detest it.
Yeah.
But I suppose, yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, I'm at the same time I'm saying sales could have an input and whatever else. Those people can be wrong as well.
Yeah, they can. Yeah.
Because covers. This is something we can go on to talk about now. It's like covers work as trends, right? A lot of the time we can expand on that in a second. But as with all trends, someone has to break the mold for a new trend to exist, right? So let's say 10 years ago it was all photographs of people on covers, and then someone did one cover that was an illustration. This is a spurious example, and that book sold shed loads. And books after that are now going to have illustrated covers because it's been shown that an illustrated cover can be a success. But someone has to break that mold. Someone has to say, I don't want to do it like everyone else is doing it. I want to do it like this. When that one's a success, people then shift to doing that one.
So we're coming up to the issue of why do some covers look so suspiciously similar to other books? I was doing I say research, a very brief bit of research about this before we started recording, and I remembered that Alice Slater, who does one of the co-hosts of the What Page podcast, I think she has an ongoing Twitter thread called Book Cover Synergy, which I was just looking through, and which is quite funny, and it does show the kind of striking similarities between certain books. Like there was an interesting one. One of our books actually popped up in there, which was Atrib and Other Stories by Ellie Williams. But there, the pattern, I don't know which way it happened here. The pattern was eerily reminiscent of a yes, that book that you're holding up, of a kind of clothing design, had a very similar sort of swirls on it. But I mean, elsewhere, you can, if you just Google why a book cover so similar, you'll get endless articles saying, going, oh, why are books so similar these days? I mean, I think it's probably always been a little bit like that, especially for certain genres. I found a good one from Vice Australia. Why do all women's books have the exact same cover? I asked a psychologist why Drowning in a Dress and Butterfly in a Jar are used to sell books to women. And I thought about it, and I've looked at it, and wow, there's a huge amount of, I don't know, I'd say maybe like middle-brow novels, I suppose, aimed at women that feature a kind of woman, usually a kind of white blonde woman in a dress, drowning underwater. So that's a kind of visual trope that gets across a certain kind of novel. I suppose that tells the reader what's inside, right?
Yeah, up to a point. I mean, I think that's my kind of point. It's like that someone had to do that cover first, right? And then that went boom, and everyone goes, "Oh, right, we're going to copy that." But yeah, it does in a way tell you what's inside it. I think historically, obviously, and I know this a lot from authors I know, and there's a very famous blog as well of like every single cover of an African novelist seems to have a shot of an acacia tree and a sunset, like it's on the Serengeti, even though it might be set in Lagos or whatever. And I think there can be a real danger of like some reductionism there, where you're lumping, there's genre and then there's genre. So if it's genre like crime or romance or whatever, and you're like, okay, I get that as a genre, but as African is not a genre. So when we talk about when it's in the same genre as X, you're like, being from a certain continent does not a genre make. Whereas I do.
So, but is that for books? Do you think by, let's say, African writers they're being published in the UK?
Yeah, definitely.
Is that style of cover the world around? I actually don't know on that. I don't know. Is that a way of selling it to a UK audience, saying this is a kind of exotic novel set in Africa, which by the way, I'm not endorsing the word exotic there, but I think that's how they try and sell the book.
Yeah, I guess so, and that has to come from a previous design aesthetic, maybe possibly from colonial times. I don't know. Maybe from old magazines of like African literature that were exoticized or fetishized or whatever. And yeah, sure. I think if you probably looked at a Chinese cover of Chinua Achebe, it's going to look different to what we get. And obviously a Nigerian cover of Chinua Achebe is going to look different to what we have, and an Argentinian cover of Chinua Achebe is going to look different. It's about the cultural, I assume, about the cultural interpretations of those countries. Whereas when you're looking at stuff like A Drowned Woman, what is that? What's that saying? That's what I'm interested in. Is why is that suddenly something that appeals to women? I mean, let's try and reverse it and think we're two blokes. We're in our, we're sort of heteronormative. What books we could conceivably be the kind of people who read Bravo 20, or you know what I mean? Like, what would it be that someone would be trying to appeal to us? Because if they think A Drowned Woman is appealing to women, what's appealing to quote unquote stereotype men?
Well, I suppose the argument here would be that maybe books for men are maybe less rigidly marketed. I think it's probably fair to say that there's a certain kind of writing by women that's often known as chick lit. I don't want to go into the whys and wherefores of that term. You're Marianne Keyes and all that kind of stuff. Those books have a very, very set visual style, because I think that's supposed to be telling you what you're getting. And this sort of, what do they call it, drowning in a dress, also gets something across. I don't know. Are men? It seems ridiculous to talk about men and women as these just kind of heterogeneous groups. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
But I do think the category of women is a bigger one in the like salespeople's heads than the category of men. Let's think of books that are marketed specifically to men. In terms of fiction, I don't know. I'm struggling. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like maybe crime, but loads of women read and write crime.
I think maybe your macho classics like Hemingway or Kerouac or Bukowski might be more oriented towards men, I think.
Maybe. I think it's going to be more in the realm of non-fiction, like you've mentioned.
Yeah, like your Bravo 20, or even like your football biography. Yeah. Alex Ferguson's Tells It Like It Is, sort of, or whatever. There's that sort of stuff. These are the highly commercial. We're talking about highly commercial books here. We're not talking about kind of your average literary fiction, are we? I don't know.
Looking back through this thread of Alice Slater's, there are some very literary examples of oddly similar, or are they oddly similar covers? What's one here? There's one. I'm just going to bring it up. Bear with me. So I can see one recently. There's the book by Andrea Lawler, Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl. Very good book. I read that recently. Which is being compared to a book called Good as Hell Remix, Lizzo and Ariana Grande, which is a record, but they share a weird synergy.
I think also there's the Audre Lorde one that Silver Press put out. That was Your Silence Will Not Protect You. That was kind of almost a similar-ish cover. I mean, I've also got this one here. I remember when Sarah Perry's Essex Serpent came out, which I'm just showing up here, which is kind of a loopy swirl of a serpent with the title and then the name, and then lots of flora in the background. That became an aesthetic for about a year and a half for a bunch of other books.
It did, didn't it? And I think, because obviously the Essex Serpent, very good book, did very, very well. I think its cover helped it do very, very well. And I think that's a wonderful cover. So to me, it seems obvious why books that might appeal to a similar kind of reader, they'll think, well, in our cover brief to the designer, we're going to say it's in the vein of the Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. So, and that's why, because the salespeople, they want people to buy the book. What's an easy way to go, if you liked the Essex Serpent, you'll like this? Give it a similar cover.
Yeah, I get that, but that's the point, is what was the reference for the person who designed the Essex Serpent? If that's the original, what brief are you giving that designer?
Do you know, I doubt it was the original, but it might be that kind of weird combo where they might have said, right, we've got this novel, maybe it's like an earlier kind of type of design that let's try and bring this back. Then the book does really well. And then it kind of gathers its own momentum. And then people have taken such notice of it. They're like, okay, this has established its own little visual code for a while.
Yeah,
and they all sort of peter out, don't they, after a couple of years, and then there's a new one, and they all sort of go through
absolutely.
these cycles.
It's all trend based. It's absolutely trend based. I think before we have to finish up pretty soon, I think before we go on to just talk about a couple of covers that we like, and I've got some examples here, I just wanted to talk a little bit about classics. And when you reissue classics, or you bring back books from the dead or whatever it is, and series design, you often get this with classics. So I didn't know whether, I think you can probably talk a bit more authoritatively on this than me, but there's a certain aesthetic to doing a classics series, isn't there? Could be modern classics, could be old classics. It's still.
Yes, well, they all have a set design, don't they, where they usually just vary the image. So Penguin Classics is a very good example. Penguin Modern Classics as well. I think Faber do Faber do a run of classics now?
And Vintage do as well.
Vintage do. I mentioned that non-fiction publisher Eland earlier. So I mentioned I bought another book by Norman Lewis. So that's their series style. Very basic, I suppose, quite basic design, but very powerful. They get kind of very iconic or evocative black and white photo on the front cover, title of the author, and that's it with the.
But that, to me,
branding.
That looks like a classics series. It doesn't have to be Elan. That could be vintage, or that.
And it is a classic series. So yeah.
So there's a certain aesthetic to the classics series as well.
Yeah.
Which isn't. That's not the original covers from whenever it was published.
Maybe a bit less visually busy, more restrained. Kind of, I don't know. Yeah. In terms of series design. This isn't series design, but I think you mentioned Fitzcarraldo earlier. I've got a copy here of Ash Before Oak by Jeremy Cooper, published by Fitzcarraldo. For all of their fiction, Fitzcarraldo stay with exactly the same cover design.
Different book. The Fallen, same cover design.
Yeah. So, and then for their non-fiction books, it's inverted, isn't it?
White.
Kind of creamy white cover with a blue title. I mean, what are your opinions on that? Do you think... I mean, it's cheaper, isn't it, doing it that way? Easier. You don't have to do any cover design meetings. I'm split. I love Fitzcarraldo, and I love a lot of their books, and I really respect Jacques, and we're very friendly with them. And I'm kind of split on it because I know it makes them collectible. It means people buy them; they're distinctive immediately, and someone goes, "That's a Fitzcarraldo book." The distinguishing of the publishing is very strong. It's probably influence from the French way of doing publishing, in the fact that they're even called Fitzcarraldo editions rather than Fitzcarraldo Press or whatever. The only difficulty I have with it is if I was an author, would I want my book to look the same as everybody else's? That I don't know. But they might be like, I want to have a Fitzcarraldo cover. That's the flip side of isn't it?
Right. So let's imagine there's 4 Fitzcarraldo authors all at the same launch, reading. And it's like one there with a blue book, one here with a blue book, one there with a blue book. And it would look quite funny. I want to see that, actually. Yeah. So, Jack, if you're listening to this, please sort that.
I've got an example of, this is my sort of bibliophile streak coming out. So I've got a few of these books by Influx Press, which are kind of high-end weird fiction. It cost me about 30 quid, this book. Dan Watt, brilliant writer. All of their hardbacks have this basic style. So how would you describe it, Kit, to the podcast listener? You're seeing this.
Big title, Petals and Violins in a serif font, and then a very small, what's that, like a cream background?
Creamy, sort of creamy yellow background.
And then a very small image, a rectangle image portrait in the middle. Can't quite see what the image is.
It's a kind of woman with a sort of fire in her belly.
Oh yeah, I see. Is that a painting?
That is a painting, yeah. And then, so all of their books basically have the same cover art, but then they also print on the hardback, so you've got kind of more abstract image with foiling and all the stuff on there. So again, they have a series design, and I think with those kind of presses, that kind of rewards the collector, doesn't it? Like a bit like Fitzcarraldo does. So you can have all your Fitzcarraldos or Tartaruses all in a line. They all fit together.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. For me, if we just quickly wrap up with a couple of our favourites, I'm a big fan of graphic designed
Mm.
covers. So I've got two here which I really like, which are quite similar and very different in terms of authors. So the Flame Alphabet by Ben
Mm.
Marcus. Actually, are they different in terms of authors? I think they're quite similar. Actually, hold on. Flame Alphabet. So it's got these like flames coming up, graphic design overtaking the text, basically beautiful kind of graphics there. And then you've got Moody Branch by Emerson Okoji, and
So, so they're kind of overlapping patterns.
it's got an overlapping
Yeah.
pattern of a
Mm.
bluefish, which is the Nudie branch. And actually, when I come to think of it, both authors really play with language and how language works, not in the same way, but in sort of similar fashion. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is an indicator of like a linguistic playfulness within the text. But I'm really big fan of that kind of like illustrated sort of graphic design style rather than photographs. I'm not a big photograph fan on covers.
No, I don't know. So for me, if it works, it works. Like so, boy parts, for example,
Mm.
that is a photograph. It's a photographic image, and I think it works very strongly. Yeah, I'm probably less anti-photo than you.
The one photo I did like I picked out because there's very rare that I like them. Is this? It's a Ramachandra Guha, corner of a foreign field. It's about Indian cricket, but the photo is really dynamic.
Yeah.
There's a lot of action happening in that photograph. Whereas when you just have a sort of dead photograph where there's not really much going on,
No.
I'm not as fond.
I've kind of gone through all the books I'd sort of piled up next to me, but a recent cover I really liked because I think it's quite mad is Dead Astronauts by Jeff
Oh yeah,
Vandermeer.
that's great. That's like
Look at that cover.
leaking oil.
It's like leaking oil, but like made sort of rainbow colours.
Yeah, yeah.
It's properly. I think the word would be lysergic, LSD, tripping out kind of.
Mm.
Um,
That fits his writing as well, I guess. You know,
it
so
does, yeah. And I
mm.
just I think Fourth Estate did this book, and that's one of my favourite covers of
Right.
I think this year because I just think it's so striking,
Mm.
and I think so unusual to have that amount of kind of mad psychedelic colour.
Yeah,
It's great.
I know that.
I was going to ask you a
Yeah.
question to finish up with. Do we follow trends, Influx, when we're putting together our cover
Ooh,
briefs?
do we follow trends? My
Consciously, do we?
my ego says no.
But you
Uh,
don't know what's happened up here. You don't know how you've been influenced
no,
by
I
what you.
don't. I don't actually.
And the designer as well should, in theory, they'll be aware of current design trends, won't they?
That's a really difficult question, and that now makes me wonder whether other people are conscious of whether they follow trends or not
Because
necessarily. I mean,
yeah,
some people are blatantly doing it, but
because I don't think it's always a hugely conscious process. All of this.
no. I suppose I think with something like jolts, like we said, that's not a trend, but
Hmm.
we're directly referencing other designs, but it's not a trend-based thing. I like to think we don't because I don't think we necessarily publish things that are on trend
In a good way.
in a good way. Yeah, so we're not looking for the next Sarah Perry or the next X, Y, Z.
No, we're not.
So I don't think we need to do that. But whether
Mm.
it's unconscious trend following, quite possibly, because we look at a load of book covers all the time. We go to bookshops, constantly looking at books.
Yeah.
So they must filter in somehow. Yeah. That's a good way to finish, I think, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would just agree with that. I don't really know. I'd probably to some extent, I'd say, yeah, I'm definitely influenced by all this stuff kind of swirling around us. I think we all are, and that definitely feeds in.
So what we're saying is, the basic conclusion is, treating Africa like it's a genre is racist. Treating women's fiction like it's a genre is misogynistic. But on the other hand, trends kill a trend.
Yeah, I mean, let's leave it at that. I think that's fine.
All right. I guess we'll be back next week. Who knows? Maybe we'll just continue these after lockdown anyway. But
Yeah, I think we could, but we could record them. Like we could speak in the same room. You never know.
oh my
Who
god,
knows?
can you imagine? Oh, okay, right. Thanks for that. Cheers, Gary.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.